by a couple clarifications. It's important always to say that I'm not a lawyer. When I'm talking about legal rights or civic rights, people think that I am a lawyer and think I can resolve their particular immigration issue. And the first thing we have to be clear about and set expectations is that I'm not a lawyer, I'm a community educator. And our primary goal is that this person and their family know their rights here in the United States. Basically, the agenda of the presentation answers three questions. What are the recent changes in immigration policy? And when I started this off about a year and a half ago, the list was this small, and now it's grown. We also talk about what rights we have as immigrants, and I always like to use inclusive language, and I think we all should use inclusive language because, I mean, few of us can't say we didn't come from immigrants, and that helps, right? And also, lastly, how can I protect my family from ICE, right? From immigration and customs enforcement. So the changes in policy are a lot. There have been a lot of executive orders that have been signed by this administration, but I just go over kind of a couple of highlights. For example, the map here you see is the wall that the administration wants to build, and it's about 2,000 miles long. And not really feasible, but the idea or the symbol of the wall is what they've been most successful at, right? And then actual policy changes. Catch and release was a policy that previous administrations held, basically saying that if people cross the border or if ICE does a raid, they'll only really take in people with criminal records, with strong, heavy criminal records. And that has changed with this new administration. Now it's not catch and release, it's basically catch and detain. Doesn't matter if you have a criminal record or not. Before it was narcotics trafficking or domestic violence issues, terrorism, that really led to a process of deportation, and now that's not the case. And also detention centers are being built all throughout the country. So the director of ICE, Director Mike Homan, asked for a substantial increase in their budget, and most of this was to build or rent these detention centers for adults and for children, as you now know. And they've also asked for a budget to almost double their troops, right? So right now, ICE and CBP have about 20 to 25,000 men, and they've asked for a budget to increase it by 15,000 more. So the administration is pushing through all of these different changes to immigration. Here I love this picture because it's the first mom that was deported by this administration. Her name is Guadalupe Garcia de Hoyos, and she basically was, I mean, her story exemplifies a lot of the stories of immigrant families here. She was a mom, she came here illegally, she crossed the border illegally. She has 2 United States citizen children, and about 8 years ago, as many families do, she committed a crime which was fraud. She basically handed a fake Social Security to get a job. And she was caught. I'm not sure how she was caught. I'm not sure about the details, but it was 8 years ago. It was the previous administration, and the rules were different. So basically, she had to go to court. She was found guilty of fraud, but she was sentenced to a year of community service. So anybody knows community service, it's reading to children, picking up garbage. It's minor. It was treated as a misdemeanor as immigration crimes are, right? This administration has changed that from treating it as a misdemeanor to treating it as a felony, basically, right? And now you go to jail for just crossing the border or overstaying your visa. So she was sentenced to a year in doing community service, and she had to come to the immigration office once a year just to check in, just to see everything was going all right. And she came in February of 2017, and the next day she was deported without any kind of process, trial, seeing a lawyer. Basically, they told her you had a waiver for your deportation process, but that's no longer valid. So they just took her in and sent her back home. And she's been not a poster child, but a poster mom for families everywhere in this country. So basically, people at risk aren't criminals or immigrant criminals anymore. Now it's just anybody that overstays their visa. Permanent residents are at risk. People think that it's only undocumented folks that really should be afraid of this, but not only permanent residents, and I guess I have to update this, but about 2 months ago, the administration passed a new policy creating a task force that is going to look into denaturalizing citizens. So in the past 20 to 30 years, there's been about 25 million naturalized citizens, right? And they're saying that many of those committed fraud in their process. Now, committing fraud, they've left it very vague. So one example that I was told is, for example, there's a question asking, have you ever committed a crime? It doesn't specify if in the US or if in the country you used to live, it just asks, have you ever committed a crime? Now, if somebody had an abortion in, for example, Colombia, where I'm from, and it's illegal there, that's sufficient basis to open up a case because you've lied to the US government. So I haven't updated this, but also US citizens, naturalized at least US citizens, are at risk as well. And before, it was an immigration judge who ultimately said, you're at risk to national security or public order and you need to be deported. And now that discretion has been given to ICE agents, just federal agents, right? It's not only a judge deciding these things. So those are kind of, I know it's kind of grim, but that's what it is. So I like to tell folks the difference between local and federal law enforcement, only because a lot of these folks come from countries where there isn't divided sovereignty. They don't have a federal government different from a local government. It's just the central government. And so I like to tell them, and that's why I put a nice smiling face of NYPD and these guys giving us their backs. Because a lot of people are not reporting crimes. They're not reporting domestic violence, they're not reporting theft, they're not reporting a lot of things because they're afraid that the police will come and deport them, right? So I like to tell them NYPD, they're usually in uniform, so that's the way you can tell that they're NYPD. You always ask for a badge. They're not always smiling, but it's I rather deal with NYPD than with ICE agents anytime. And another way you can distinguish is that when federal agents, not just ICE, when they do a raid, they always go in packs. So I like to tell them it's in pack of wolves, about 8 or 7 per perp. That's kind of a rule at the federal police level. And I also like to distinguish and tell them, I mean, we don't obviously do any kind of politics, but we do tell them that the mayor is ultimately the boss of NYPD, and the administration, the president, I do not like to say his name, is ultimately the boss of all federal police. Excuse me. So, fundamental rights, this is kind of the core of the presentation. What rights do immigrants have in this country? And a lot of people, like, a lot of great organizations that focus on legal rights go into the whole minutia of 4th and 5th Amendment rights and the Constitution, but a lot of these folks don't even know what the Constitution is. So it's better just to chew it down and tell them what it means practically. So basically it's privacy rights and due process rights. And privacy is, you're not obligated to sign anything. Nobody goes into your house without your permission or without a judicial warrant, so don't open the door. Don't consent to any kind of frisking or interrogation. So that's one, don't consent. And, I'm missing a word there. Don't accept. I can't remember what that don't accept is. Don't accept any BS from, no, it's, I can't remember what that don't accept. Anyway, so we'll continue. A lot of these folks don't know what a judicial warrant is, and when I tell them nobody goes into their house without one, they're like, all right, so what is that? Dealing with law enforcement in South or Central America is very different than dealing with law enforcement here. So I basically just tell them this is what a basic warrant looks like, though in New York there's like 15 different formats depending on district, on county. But the essential things that we should know, that everybody should know, is that it has to have the name of the person they're looking for, the address where they're looking for that person, and the signature of a judge. And that last part is what can be most confusing, because ICE agents can lie to us. They can lie to anybody. Basically, the court says, as part of their investigations or their operations, they can lie, tell little white lies, and say, for example, they're police, and they're investigating a robbery down at the corner. Not their ICE, and they're looking to deport you, right? So a very important thing is to know that a judicial warrant is the only thing that can get you arrested, or that can that makes you open the door, which is a search warrant, which is also a judicial warrant. It's signed by a judge. Since ICE can lie to us, sometimes they'll come to different families and show an administrative warrant, which is not signed by a judge. It's signed by their supervisor or another law enforcement officer. And that does not give them any right to go into your house or to arrest anybody. But people don't know that, especially because a lot of these communities don't have the best English. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop. Yes?
Just a really quick question. So if they present this warrant in English and the person can't read English, do they have a right to ask for it in Spanish?
In New York, they have the right, and they can ask for an interpreter, and at least NYPD has those walkie-talkies where they have access to interpreters. I usually tell folks, don't open the door even if they show the warrant through the peephole. Ask for them to, slide it in underneath the door. Check it out, read it, make sure you know the words that you're looking for in English, which is judge or justice, and take a picture of it. That's what I tell folks. And then send it to either your closest CBO or your attorney or a close family member, but just keep track of this documentation. Yes?
But if you ask them to slide it in, I'm going to assume that the ICE or whoever it is doesn't speak their language. Or would they have to, if the person is talking to them through the door,
Yeah, I mean, ICE agents technically get 6 months of Spanish language training. Yeah, but they're still not very, very good. But I mean, I guess through signs or just stick something underneath the door. But just don't. The idea is don't open the door, because once you open the door, they can say that, oh, they're inviting me in. So I give the example. What ICE does is they have tactics. So they try to scare people. They usually don't have this warrant. Because to get a warrant, you have to convince a judge, right? And that takes a whole process. So usually what they do is they come with the administrative warrants. They rely on the ignorance of a lot of immigrant families. They rely on the low language capacities, and they'll just try to get them to accept the accusations. So one of the things, that's what it was. You see how it comes back to me? Do not accept accusations. And the reason why is what I just told you. There usually isn't a warrant. So what an ICE officer will do is, you came here illegally 2 years ago, and now you're working under the table for so-and-so. And it's, I guess, a normal reaction that when you're being accused, you want to defend yourself, and you're going to say, no, the conditions were frightening in Mexico, and now I'm here, and the only person that gives me a way to feed my children is so-and-so. But then you've just admitted to 2 crimes, and you're basically being arrested at that point. So the advice is, don't accept any kind of accusations. So that's for the judicial warrant. I'm sorry, did I answer? Okay. Please stop me, I usually just go on. And the second, I guess I call them round of rights that we all have as immigrants, though here I guess we can't really everybody can't include themselves as immigrants, because U.S. citizens, that number 5 doesn't apply. So all immigrants have a right to 2 calls: an emergency call if you're arrested, and that everybody has that right. But immigrants have a second call, a second emergency call, which is calling their consulate. A lot of consulates offer consular protection services, which is basically a legal office that's there to service any co-national, right? The consulate that has the most robust program is the Mexican consulate. Those Central American consulates are getting their game together because they're being affected most. But the Mexican consulate has a 24/7 hotline that you can call at 12. I've called at 12 midnight and they'll answer. And I don't have the number here, but I can get that information. I have a kind of a data sheet with all the consulates that are being affected most heavily by this type of issue. So I tell folks, obviously, you have an emergency call, you have a right to an emergency call. People don't know that. So I usually refer to CIS or law and order, and then they're like, oh yeah. And to ask for legal assistance. So everybody has a right to a lawyer, to due process, but the administration is trying to take that away from undocumented immigrants. So here in New York, it's actually one of the, New York and I believe Los Angeles, 2 cities that have provided funds to give these undocumented folks legal assistance. And here's called NYFOP. It's the New York Immigrant Family Unification Program. And it's run by lawyers from Yeshiva University, the Vera Institute, and it's been getting funding since 2015. But everywhere else, they're on their own. So those commercials that you see of the kids kind of going into the courtroom defending themselves are true. They don't get a right to a lawyer, and their families don't either. So it's very difficult to plead your case in front of a lawyer when you have no legal acumen and also very limited language skills. So basically the system's kind of set against you. And I guess, that's all on purpose. Everything does seem a little grim, so I tell folks there's a couple of safe spaces. You'll see later why there's a caveat to that. So there's 3 spaces: schools, hospitals, and churches, or faith-based organizations that are safe. But they're safe why? It's not because Congress says that they're safe spaces, it's because ICE wrote an internal memo saying these are 3 spaces that we will not go into because of optics, basically. It doesn't look good that they go into a church or a school and take out screaming kids from there, right? But the bad thing about an internal memo is that they can rescind it. They haven't yet, and in New York City, I haven't heard of any cases where they go into a school, hospital, or church, which is very different from waiting outside one, right? Because people, oh no, they're ICE agents, right around my school or right around it's different being outside one and going into one. There was a close call case about a year ago where immigration agent went into a high school in Queens, and the chancellor got crazy, and the mayor did a whole thing, but it wasn't an ICE agent. It wasn't federal law enforcement. It was USCIS, so they're basically the bureaucrats of immigration, and so it hasn't happened yet. So I feel comfortable telling folks that these spaces are still safe, right? And there's a difference. Before we spoke about warrants, and the only place you need a warrant is in a private space, right? So private property is really protected in this country, and that's why you need a warrant to go in somebody's private property. Public spaces are different. Public spaces can be anything from the street, even in an apartment building, the hallway can be a public space, depending on the building. So I work with NYCHA folks, and here we have a debate whether what's public or not. If you're on the streets, I tell folks usually, I remind them about their fundamental rights. Don't accept accusations, don't sign anything. But basically, if somebody's going to interrogate you, the first thing you ask an officer is, am I free to go? And you ask and ask and ask, basically, until they answer. So if he says, no, you're not free to go, it's because he knows who you are, and he probably has some kind of justification to stop you and even maybe detain you. But if the officer or the agent says, yes, you're free to go, it means he was just testing, and you can be on your merry way, or not that merry. And then private spaces, like I said, can be your job or your home. And a lot of people, and this is a bit more of a difficult part, I tell folks that you can take control of the situation, and if ICE agents see that you have some knowledge about your rights, and not only you have knowledge, but you act upon them, they'll kind of lower, I guess they'll be a little less aggressive. So you can ask questions. Who are you looking for? Who is asking? Meaning, where are you coming from? Are you police? Are you ICE? And one thing, since they could lie, a badge never lies. So you can ask an officer to show you their badge, and it'll say NYPD, or it'll say ICE or FBI, but the badge doesn't lie. And I would even suggest to folks to ask if they can give them their supervisor or their immediate commanding officer. And obviously in a situation like this, it's a scary situation, so asking these things isn't easy, but you have two options. You either don't prepare. I mean, after a workshop like this, I tell folks, you have to decide if somebody's at risk in your house. And if somebody is, then you have to start talking about it in your family. And if you don't have a plan, if you don't do these exercises or read upon what your rights are, then you're just going to be surprised and not know what to do in case, God willing, doesn't happen, you encounter an ICE agent. So it's better to practice and even practice these questions, right? So just to finish off, there's resources that the city provides. Now, these are actually good resources. We're not doing a little skit for the city, but Action NYC is a hotline you can call for legal services. Now, Catholic Charities manages that hotline. People call in. They're not lawyers, but they're prepped in immigration law, and they'll help you find the referral you need. And ID NYC, I don't know if anybody's heard of it or anybody has it, but that's something we like to push because it's a sort of ID for New York solidarity, I would say. So it's not just an ID for immigrants, but it helps because it doesn't say where you're born. It just gives you basic info like your address, your picture, your date of birth, and it has a lot of benefits for New Yorkers. And since in New York, if you're stopped by a law enforcement agent, you have to present ID, right? And you can't present your consular ID, you can't present your passport because that's already proof that you're not from here. So that's why we're pushing these type of alternative IDs or school IDs. And that's kind of it. Is there any questions? Yeah.
I have probably a longer answer question than a specific one.
Okay.
But in terms of New York being a sanctuary city, what does that imply in terms of any extra safety people may have that we should be aware of that maybe is rumored not to be true? Or
Yeah. Okay. So sanctuary cities are cities that protect, they go beyond what's necessary to protect their immigrant communities. New York, or at least you have to say this administration, has provided certain protections such as ICE or the administration starting something that's called 287G agreements, which is basically law enforcement agreements from the federal level to the local level. They're trying to deputize local police to enforce immigration law. New York doesn't do that. Neither does Los Angeles, or actually neither does a great part of California, and other select progressive cities, I guess, in the United States. And so, for example, a year ago, there were 200 exceptions where if ICE called in and said, hey, you just arrested Andres for whatever it may be, and you're holding him for 1 day because you have to let him go the next day. It wasn't a big charge. So they'll say, hold him 3 more days so I can go, take him into custody, and then start a deportation proceeding. New York doesn't recognize any kind of ICE detainers or any kind of those requests. So that's one part, right? And just having the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, I mean, whatever you may think of them, they have come and provided a lot of services to the immigrant communities that weren't there before. And just yesterday, the commissioner came out with, it's more of a political thing, but an abolish ICE, So basically, there's this whole new movement to rethink immigration law enforcement. So I think New York City is a sanctuary city, but we just have to remember that nobody can tell ICE to stay away from New York City. They're downtown, actually, right? They have 2 huge offices downtown, and they have a lot of detention centers in the city, in Westchester, and in New Jersey, where they're locking up folks.
My other little question, hopefully, was like a lot of families have been concerned about the difference between their information being accessed by a federal agency versus a state agency. So say a family has a public assistance case, or they're going to apply for one, they're afraid that, like, we've in the past been like, oh, okay, but, the federal world doesn't have access to that information because it's for New York State, but that's not necessarily the case anymore, right?
It depends.
Like,
so
if you have welfare, you could be open.
well,
to
if it's a federal funded thing, and what they're pushing with the public charge policy that they're going to come out with, they started rolling it out slowly just to get reaction, and now they're seeing that they're going to actually push it through, is that if you get any kind of benefit, and that's just not even welfare, you can,
Food stamps or whatever.
even asking for a change of status from student to whatever visa and being denied could trigger a deportation process because it's a benefit that's been denied. So yeah, that's coming soon.
Okay.
So it's like things that you see in Texas. I see a lot of New Yorkers say, oh my God, that's horrible, but it's all the way over there. But with an administration that's pushing harder and harder, I think all of those things will probably come up here sooner or
They're
later.
calling that benefit charge. What are they calling it?
Public charge benefit. Yeah. Any other question before I hand it off? Okay. Thank you.
All right. So, as we said, we're piloting this, so we're trying to figure out some kinks, and I just want to get some hands as to low, moderate, and high levels of anxiety just listening to that presentation. So I guess who's at the low range of anxiety just listening to the presentation? Moderate? High? Okay. All right, that's helpful. All right, so I'll let you share there.
So one of the reasons we asked this is because originally we had prepared to do our presentation first and then his. And then when we were practicing that day, when no one showed up, we realized, no, we have to switch this, because after we did ours, then he did this, and we were all like, tense, and we're like, okay, we need that breathing exercises now. So we switched it, and I think it's a better idea. So at this point, what we did was to identify ourselves and tell them about the origins of the program, and we also did the presentation in English and Spanish simultaneously, and we also asked if there were other languages, just to keep in mind for the future as well, and also to explain to them that it was a work in progress, and that we needed, if they had any feedback, to give it to us.
Okay, and then so as we'll explain to families, our plan for today is to learn how stress and anxiety affect the body, how to support yourself and family during these trying times, how to talk to your children about immigration issues, and to give them coping tips and resources available to them and their families as well.
Then we went into, we knew that Andre went through the long talk, but we wanted to reinforce that the families usually feel afraid to get services if they need it. So we kind of reinforced that it's okay to call 911 if they're in an emergency situation. It's okay to take your child or yourself to a hospital or to the doctor, and it's okay to seek mental health services and treatment.
Additionally, you can take your children to school to attend school, and you can also attend your church or place of worship.
Then what we did is we divided how to talk to kids depending on age ranges. So we started with, first, what does stress looks like in young children, ages 0 to 4, for example. So we explained that if you start to notice an increase in fuzziness, you notice that they're more agitated, they're more clingy, there's changes in the routine and sleep and eating habits, there's an increase in tantrums, including, hurting themselves, and for some kids also somatic complaints.
I guess to add to that, part of this is like there's no one has really done this before, and so we've had some cases, and so we just extrapolated from the knowledge that we have, and so a lot of this will look very familiar to you guys, but just knowing what you can present to the families. But additionally, what does stress look like in young children? You can see regression in development. So if they were attaining, larger vocabulary, but now you're seeing fewer words, or if they were once potty trained, but now you're seeing a regression in that development as well.
How about in school-age children? So we explained about the idea of somatic complaints and explain physical pains like bellyache, headaches, sometimes rashes. Again, changes in routine and sleep habits. They become more sensitive, irritable, or withdrawn. They're just more quiet and more reserved. We kind of wanted to give like a picture of what it could look like in their kids.
Additionally, we might see school avoidance, and not just in kids that were always dealing with school avoidance, but in the child that used to love school but now is not wanting to go to school anymore, or they're seeming on edge, excessively worried, or cranky.
How about in adults? So we also wanted to give ideas to kind of identify it in themselves and also their other adult relatives. Unexplained physical pain again, having bigger emotional reactions than normal, changes in sleep and eating patterns. So some of them are similar to what they see in their older kids. Anxiety, panic attacks, and we use the word ataque de nervios for the Spanish-speaking families. And excessive checking the news, which I know I was doing that quite a bit around the time of elections, so we explained that too, that we can become obsessive in wanting to know more and more and more and checking.
All right, so having heard all that, what can we do? And we felt that the best response is to be prepared. So what does that mean? We want to encourage families to talk about their immigration status within their family, because as Andres mentioned, parents might be undocumented, but you might have a child with a green card, and then you might even have within the same family a child who is a U.S. citizen. So just having that discussion and understanding everybody's status. We also recommend to families, and as you'll see as we continue on, that it's very important to be honest with them, even if it feels scary or it is and will be a difficult conversation to have. And to tell your children it is private information, but also to be clear with them who they can share this with and who they cannot share this with. All right. So here's something that we were thinking about, because we first, like Alba said, we did the presentation first and then it was Andres, but we had also were considering immediately doing a calming exercise right after Andres' presentation. So I'm just curious to know who thinks that would be a good idea, as opposed to saving it for now. Okay, all right, helpful to know. That's why I got your ratings. So what we would want to introduce to the families is a calming exercise. Specifically for this one is a breathing exercise. And what we would explain to them is just, as we know, knowing that when we're feeling very anxious, it's very difficult to focus and concentrate, and recognizing this is a stressful topic, just talking about it, nothing is actively happening, but it's going to be hard to take the information that we are trying to give them if they are feeling these high levels of anxiety. So I don't know if, for the interest of time, I'm not going to walk you guys through the exercise, but we would actually just do a typical breathing exercise that you all are familiar with, and just really letting the families know, like as we do in our sessions, modeling to them how to do it, but also identifying times when they can do it. So if they've just been watching the news and they feel like, that's why we highlighted, those somatic symptoms. If you feel your heart rate increasing, this might be a good time to put to practice that belly breathing that we talked about.
Then we went into how to help children of all different ages feel less worried and using some of these techniques. And the reason we did all ages is to keep in mind that later on we'll add more depending on the age group. So these are in general what they can do. So keep, like I mentioned earlier, all the news off when children are at home. Being mindful that children are listening, even if they're playing or running around, even when they're watching cartoons or something else, or in their iPad or electronic tablet, they're always listening. Make sure that the parents explain that it is the parents' job, their job, to keep everyone safe, with the help of professionals like lawyers. You don't necessarily have to mention that part, but say that it's very important to know that it is the parents' job, so that the children don't feel it is their responsibility. Also, to tell the child that it's their job in general to play, to go to school, to do their chores, kind of to keep the normality of life. Maintain the consistent routine, like I mentioned, and emphasize safety to make them feel that they're safe.
Okay, and then from here we start to break it down again from that developmental lens, with the far right blue scroll keeping in mind the general recommendations that apply across the developmental span. But in focusing from kids from 1 to 3, you don't have to tell the child or explain to them what immigration status means, because as we know, cognitively, they're not going to understand what you're talking about, so there's no point. What you can emphasize is that they will always be taken care of, so really emphasizing that safety and security point. Okay, so part of what we were thinking is actually doing a role play during our presentation to give and bring to life to families what it is that we are talking about. So in this situation, we have a 3-year-old. Jaden is a 3-year-old boy. His father was recently detained and deported, and Jaden is asking about his dad. So we're going to go about this in 2 ways. The first way is how not to go about this, and then the second way is how to go about this, and you'll see why in just a second. I'll be the child, Alba will be the parent. I miss Daddy. When is he coming home?
Dad is working. He'll be home soon.
All right, so that is something we don't want to do, and to the parents we're going to explain it's through the best of intentions. We understand why you would take this approach with your child. You're trying to be protective. It is a difficult topic and conversation to have, and we'll also explain to them sort of this very, with young children, it's a very all about me perspective, and so thinking about that, why isn't Daddy coming home? Is it because I got in that terrible fight with my sister? It's because of that, isn't it? They didn't come home. And in the same way that they might draw those conclusions about negative events, that they can draw positive conclusions about the things that they do. Like, Mommy brought cookies because I did such a great job hanging out with my sister. We played and we didn't fight. So they might conclude the same thing about this situation, just for them to be mindful of that, whereas they might not have that knowledge or awareness of it. So how do we want to go about it? I miss Daddy. When is he coming home?
Jaden, I miss Daddy too.
Can we call him? Where is he?
Daddy went to the Dominican Republic where he was born. He has to stay there for now. Daddy needs a special paper in order to come back, and he's working hard to get it. But he really misses you and wishes that you did not have to go.
Are you going to go too?
No, I'm going to stay here with you. I'm also sad that Dad is not here with us. We can call him, FaceTime him, WhatsApp, a lot of WhatsApp because Dominicans use a lot of WhatsApp, and draw him pictures. Dad is always thinking about you and loving you even when he's far away. So again, we keep on the kind of greenish blue for all children, so that they kind of ingrain it in them that this is kind of the general advice. And then the extra is for kids between 4 and 6 years old. Explain that parent was born in another country, that parent is working hard to make sure that the family stays together, and answer questions as honest as you can for this age. And I want to say that at the end, we also gave a kind of a sheet, a flyer, and it had these tips on the right. All
right, and for 7 to 11 years old children, you can explain each family member's status. You can ask children what they have heard on the news from their friends or social media. So we can, we can assume that they are hearing things, that things are being talked about, or that they're from their own family situation. So to go ahead and open and invite that conversation by asking them directly. And again, as I said, we know, but to educate our families on as to why there might be a change at this point. But kids, they can think about thinking. They've developed that ability to do that, so we can engage with them much more than our younger children around this topic.
How is it feeling so far? We kind of felt like, well, for you guys, it's going to feel basic, but we just wanted to get the idea of how we divided and what we said.
About your role play, because the question was, could we call Daddy, and you didn't actually answer the question. Is that a thing?
So if you can,
do or not do, or?
So yeah, we would recommend it. So I had one situation where actually Dad was arrested and he was held, and they could. Oh no, I'm sorry. Once he was actually deported, he was arrested and then deported. So once he was sent back to DR, they could actually call him and talk to him, and so they were having conversations with him. But kiddo thought he was at work, and so again, just addressing that piece as to why is he there, but. Right. If you're detained, then you can't. But yes,
you're right.
Yes.
We didn't specify, but that's something to think about.
Yeah. Teresa.
I think the concrete things to do are great, and I can see those helping calm a parent. I think my one just tiny piece of feedback would just be. The introduction of the calming exercise, I think we as mental health professionals know that if we're calm, we can perform better. But I don't think other people who are not mental health professionals necessarily go to that. They're not thinking, okay, let me calm down first before planning out what to do. They're thinking, what do I do, what do I do, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if you change it slightly when you talk about how to get your child to focus on school and playing, this is one thing you can teach them, or this is one thing you guys can practice together in the home, and pull it out whenever you need your child to be able to focus on homework. And then saying, this is something you can do as well in order to help calm yourself down when you need to get some, there's an important meeting with your lawyer or something that to help you focus as well.
Yes, thank you. And that is part of it. We would go into it much more detail in that way as to the when and the how and the whys.
And also we had thought of doing a little psycho-ed about why physiologically it works. I remember we were going to do that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think the physiological would be great too.
When you were asking earlier if it's a good idea to do it right away or where you put it, I actually think it's good where you put it because you gave a little intro. First, I liked how you asked, okay, who's stressed now after we talked about this? Then you gave a little info of, how stress affects us. Mm-hmm. And then saying, okay, now we're actually going to help you de-stress and here's why, and blah, blah, blah. So I think if you did it right away, they're already so stressed, they might not hear the information
to take
about,
it in.
Why it's important to do it.
Okay.
So
I appreciate that. Paulina?
I wonder if it would also be helpful to just, even before Andres presents, to say a lot of this information is anxiety provoking. Mm-hmm. So we're going to start off with just a relaxation exercise.
That's a good idea, actually. Because we want to reinforce as much as we can. Yeah. Okay. He's her note taker. Okay. There you go.
So for older kids, it gets a little bit more specific. We ask them if they can start reviewing a family plan in case someone is deported in the family. If your teenager, if your child wants to watch the news, watch it together and ask them, be there if they have questions, kind of supervise. We have also a role play with a teenager.
All right, this situation is 12-year-old Amber, lives with dad, aunt, and cousins. Her mom was recently deported. Amber seems sad, angry, and is not sleeping much.
Amber, I think it's important for you to understand why mom had to return to El Salvador.
I already know.
Can you tell me what you've heard?
Well, I hear you and Thea talking late at night, and I know that mom was taken by ICE because she's an immigrant. and I start crying. I'm not a great actress.
I know this sad and scary for all of us. We all miss mom so much. There's a lot to learn. But one thing that I want you to understand is just because you're an immigrant does not mean that you'll be deported. Mom was undocumented. That means that she did not have the paperwork to legally live and work in the United States.
It's not fair.
I know, it's so sad, and I want you to know that you can always come talk to me if you're feeling sad or upset. So then here we were going to do a grounding exercise and explain that usually is useful if they find themselves with feeling really nervous or they cannot concentrate, if they're feeling kind of all over the place. This is a good one to kind of center you back and help you refocus. So we were gonna, it explains, pick 4 colors, 3 sounds, pick 2 things you can touch, and do it with them, walk through them. So what happens when there is a family member that is facing deportation? It's important to be honest about the situation. Do not lie to your child and say the parent is at work, school, or vacation. Remind the children this is not their fault. It's very important.
All right, so if we are facing deportation, allow your child to talk about their feelings. Be a role model for your child and show them that it is okay to express emotion. So for example, it's okay to cry in front of your child and let them know you're sad. At the same time, recognizing if you are feeling, which can be very possible given the situation, feeling like your emotions are very big and it's feeling very hard to control, then we would ask you in that moment to go into a private space. We want your child to be able to know that they can express and know how to express their emotions, but if they see their parent very out of control, then that's going to be scary to them, and that's a different experience. Again, as we've been stating all along, maintain regular contact with the person who has been deported, so getting back to Daniel's question, and maintain as consistent routine as possible. So that's dinner time, sleep time, bedtime routines, homework time once we're back in school.
In case the parents are concerned about how to manage this with school, you can tell the parents that they can talk to the school staff and let them know that something important has happened or changed in the family, so that they have the teacher, they have an idea that something has changed, and to keep communication with the teachers to let the parent know if they do notice a change, to let the parent know and have communication of any behavioral change or any decrease in performance, and also they can reach out to the school counselor.
All right, so tips for managing stress at home. We recommend taking walks around the neighborhood and the park, cooking if that's something you love to do, listening to music. I know, again, we're trying to make this culturally relevant, so I think Alba added like her salsa, bachata, depending on our audience. Taking calming baths if we can, knitting if that's something people are interested, dancing, talking to friends, watching calming, funny movies, TV shows, reading, and taking herbal tea. It's also important to know that when we're feeling anxious, we want to avoid too much caffeine consumption, and that's why we're specifically saying herbal tea. So too much caffeine might just drive us over the edge and make us a little too anxious. So signs that you or your child need counseling. If you find that someone in the home is drinking or smoking too much, you can't go to work. It's becoming very difficult to make it there. Amongst the children, increased fighting with siblings, or if someone's hurting themselves in any way, whether it's cutting or burning, or not wanting to leave the house, just refusing and very much withdrawing themselves in the room, just refusing to go to any events, or specifically for kids doing poorly in school.
One other tip we kind of realized as today is we didn't include praying or any religious activities, and we were discussing how when we introduced the idea of this mindfulness activities that perhaps we should also add that component that many of the families will work to use community support, religious support as part of soothing themselves, right?
Yeah.
So at the end, we gave a flyer that had some of the general tips and also information about other resources besides seeking a counselor, such as the relaxation hotline that we have that is available 24 hours. And also there were a couple of other things. And we let them know, of course, about our program, the VHIP program, how to get a referral to talk to the PCP. And if they're not a Montefiore patient, we also provided a couple of other resources.
I think just one thing to think about maybe adding is ways for if there's a family with children of just a variety of ages, lots of kids from 2 to 17, how the older kids can talk to their siblings, who may ask them questions that they don't ask their parents because they're scared to ask mom, but they ask their older sister. What could those teenagers say if they get asked?
I think on your counseling handout, you might want to include information on Lower Westchester, especially if you're giving this talk in like Yonkers or Mountford or Commercial. Because I think NYC is only for right.
Oh, NYC.
Good point.
I was just thinking about that first little vignette that you guys did, and one of the questions that the child asked is are you going to have to go there too? What kind of guidance do you give parents around that? Because, in this situation you said no, but what if there is a risk of that? How do you talk to parents about
The plan.
So that would get back to the family preparedness plan, and that would be sort of like in the event of, like, we didn't get into details here, but it's like if something were to happen, who is the family member? So they're clear whether it's like grandma, grandpa, an aunt, or an uncle, and they're very clear as to how that would completely break down. So, yeah.
I had a family in Mount Vernon, and they had done their preparedness plan, and it was some couple of friends that they were citizens, they were born here. So those were the backup.
What about parents in a detention center? And you explain that. Like I have a dad who's been in a detention center for 6 months. They keep postponing his trial. How do you explain that to the 4-year-olds? Because it's not, they're back in their
Country, right?
And you don't want to say, how do you, any suggestions?
How do you say if a parent is in a detention center?
Well, how do we say?
Sit there for months. What do they do? Because then it's going to be like.
What do we tell when a parent is in jail?
In jail, yeah.
I mean, for a 4-year-old, like you guys said, it's a 4-year-old won't really digest a detention center, less an immigration detention center because of undocumented status. So for a 4-year-old, maybe it's protecting his kind of emotional well-being. And I don't know if we say don't lie, we shouldn't lie, but telling the truth at that point is just very blunt, isn't it?
So honestly, I don't know if they have, like, if you can visit, right, or call, you can at all. So that's a tricky thing, because we were just thinking, if anything, extrapolating from what you would tell a kid if their parent is incarcerated.
Right. Yeah.
But this is a little different. So.
Or they're waiting to see if they can get that paper.
That's paper,
Yeah.
That's a lovely way to explain it. And they can't live at home while a judge decides if they can get that paper or not. So they're waiting to meet to see the judge or something.
Yeah.
Maybe reassuring, letting the child know that you will let them know as soon as the paper comes in.
And he's safe and he's the judge.
And helping the child understand that obviously this is a bad thing. We're not trying to justify, he's trying to get this paper, but this is horrible that daddy is away right now. I understand how you feel, but these are the things that have to go on before he comes back in.
Are you sure you don't want to become one?
I know. What's happening? All right.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.